If this is really the end, please let my baby live. That was the last thought Madison Claire Bennett could clearly remember before the floor seemed to tilt beneath her. People think luxury protects you from tragedy. They imagine penthouses in downtown Chicago, private elevators, designer furniture, and million-dollar views as some kind of shield against disaster. Madison used to believe that too. At 2:43 on a freezing Tuesday morning, she discovered how wrong she had been. The city sparkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse she shared with her husband. Thousands of lights stretched across the skyline like scattered diamonds. From a distance, their life looked perfect. The successful businessman, the beautiful pregnant wife, the baby boy due in less than 6 weeks. The kind of marriage people envied from behind phone screens. Yet something was terribly wrong. Madison gripped the edge of the marble kitchen island. Her vision blurred. The glass of water she had been holding slipped from her fingers and rolled across the floor. She tried taking a step forward. Her legs refused to cooperate. Confusion arrived before fear. Then fear arrived all at once. The digital clock on the wall glowed 2:43 a.m. Every second suddenly felt louder than the last. Madison pressed one trembling hand against her stomach. Her baby shifted gently beneath the silk fabric of her nightgown. That small movement became the only thing keeping her focused. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, not now." The penthouse was silent. Logan was not home. He had told her there was a late business event downtown. Another networking dinner. Another opportunity. Another promise that he would be back soon. Madison wanted to believe him. Lately, believing him had become harder than it used to be. She reached for her phone on the countertop. Her fingers missed it twice before finally pulling it closer. The screen illuminated her face. Logan's name sat at the top of her messages. For a moment, she hesitated. A strange thought crossed her mind. What if he did not answer? The question felt unfair. Cruel, even. He was her husband. The father of her child. The person who was supposed to come running when everything else fell apart. Yet the thought remained. Because over the past year, Logan had become a man who always seemed to be somewhere else. Physically, emotionally, sometimes both. Madison opened a new message. The words came slowly. Her hands no longer felt steady. Stroke. Baby. Help. Call 911. She stared at then she pressed it. The message disappeared from the draft box. A second later, one word appeared beneath it. Delivered. Relief washed through her chest. Logan had his phone. Logan would see it. Logan would call. Logan would help. Wait, Logan Bennett looked directly at the message. Years later, people would argue about motives. They would debate character, intention, and responsibility. None of those debates would change one simple fact. He saw it. The phone vibrated once against the polished glass table beside him. Then again. The rooftop lounge sat 38 stories above downtown Chicago, surrounded by city lights and winter air. Soft music drifted through hidden speakers. Fire pits flickered along the edge of the terrace. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the railings. It was the kind of place people visited to celebrate success. Logan had spent years building a life that granted him access to places like this. Tonight, however, success was not what occupied his attention. Chloe Madison Pierce sat across from him, smiling as she scrolled through photos from a recent luxury resort trip. Her blue dress shimmered beneath the ambient lighting. Everything about the evening had been carefully designed to feel effortless. The laughter, the drinks, the expensive view, the illusion. Logan reached for his phone without thinking. The screen illuminated his face. For a brief second, his expression changed. Chloe noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Logan did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the message. Stroke. Baby. Help. Call 911. For fragments. For words that required no interpretation. He understood exactly what they meant. Any husband would have. Any father would have. The rooftop suddenly felt quieter. Somewhere beneath the music and conversation, a different reality had entered the evening. Chloe leaned forward. "Business problem?" she asked. Logan locked the screen instinctively. Nothing important. The answer arrived too quickly, too smoothly. Chloe studied him for a moment before returning to her drink. Logan stared out at the city lights. Madison should not have been alone. The thought appeared immediately. Then another thought followed it. If he left now, questions would begin. Explanations. Excuses. Consequences. The entire evening would end. For months he had lived between two separate worlds. One world contained responsibility, marriage, parenthood, expectations. The other contained escape, simplicity, freedom from difficult conversations. Tonight, those two worlds had finally collided. The phone vibrated again. Not a new message, just the screen reactivating briefly before fading back to black. Logan picked it up once more. The message remained there waiting. Silent. Unavoidable. For a moment, he imagined calling emergency services himself. One phone call. Less than 60 seconds. Then someone else could handle everything. Yet another voice whispered inside his mind. Maybe it was not as serious as it sounded. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe someone else would find her. Maybe there was still time. Human beings tell themselves remarkable stories when they want permission to avoid the truth. Logan knew that. He also knew something else. Deep down, he did not want to interrupt the life he was living at that exact moment. Chloe looked up from across the table. "You are acting strange tonight." Logan forced a smile. Long day. Then he opened the message one final time. The timestamp glowed beneath the text. 2:43 a.m. delivered. Read. The words stared back at him. Evidence without judgment. Truth without emotion. Logan exhaled slowly. His thumb pressed against the screen. A small menu appeared. One option stood out among the others. He hesitated. Not because he did not understand what he was doing. Because he understood it perfectly. Then the message vanished. The conversation thread looked normal again. Empty. Clean. Controlled. Logan slipped the phone into his pocket and looked back toward the skyline. Somewhere across that same city, Madison was still waiting for an answer. And for the first time that night, the mystery was no longer whether help was coming. The mystery was how long the truth could remain hidden. By 3:12 a.m., the city outside still glittered like a postcard. Inside the penthouse, however, time had begun moving differently. Every minute felt heavier than the one before it. Madison Claire Bennett remained on the floor beside the kitchen cabinets, her phone lying only inches away. The screen had gone dark again. No reply. No missed call. No sign that anyone was coming. She tried to focus on the lights beyond the windows. Thousands of them stretched across Chicago. Office towers, apartment buildings, hotels, restaurants. Somewhere inside those lights, people were laughing, sleeping, working, living ordinary lives. The thought felt strangely comforting. The world was still moving even if hers seemed frozen. Her breathing slowed, then quickened again. She pressed one hand against her stomach. The baby shifted gently beneath her palm. That small movement became her anchor. "Stay with me," she whispered. The words barely reached her own ears. Upstairs, the nursery waited exactly as she had left it earlier that evening. A white crib stood near the window. Tiny blue blankets were folded neatly on a chair. Logan had promised they would spend the weekend assembling the final pieces of furniture together. That weekend never came. Lying there in the darkness, Madison found herself replaying conversations she had ignored for months. Missed dinners, last-minute business trips, phone calls taken in other rooms. Promises that always sounded sincere until they were broken. None of it had seemed important on its own. Together, however, the memories formed a picture she no longer recognized. The clock on the wall read 3:46 a.m., then 4:11, then 4:37. Hours slipped by without a single message appearing on her screen. Somewhere deep inside, a realization slowly began to take shape. Logan was not coming. She hated the thought immediately, rejected it, argued against it. Yet every passing minute made it harder to ignore. If he had seen the message, he would have called. If he had called, help would already be here. If he cared enough, this night would look very different. Outside, snow drifted softly against the glass. The city grew quieter. Even the traffic below seemed to disappear. Madison closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, nearly 20 minutes had passed. The digital clock now displayed 4:58 a.m. The silence felt enormous. Across town, Logan continued living inside a completely different reality. He laughed when Chloe told a story. He nodded through conversations. He ordered another drink he barely touched. Every now and then his hand brushed against the phone in his pocket. Not because he planned to call, because some part of him knew exactly what remained on the other side of his decision. Back in the penthouse, dawn slowly approached. A faint gray light appeared along the horizon beyond Lake Michigan. Madison stared at it through half-focused eyes. Morning had always been her favorite time of day. New beginnings. Fresh chances. Possibility. Now it felt like a deadline she might not reach. At 5:22 a.m., a strange sound echoed from somewhere in the building. A distant metallic clank. Then silence. Madison listened carefully. A few minutes later, another sound followed. Footsteps. Faint. Uncertain. Real. For the first time in hours, hope flickered inside her chest. She did not know who was outside her door. She did not know why they were there. She only knew one thing. Someone who was never supposed to be part of this story was about to change everything. The footsteps belonged to a man who was never supposed to be there. At 5:31 a.m., Eric Dalton stepped out of the service elevator carrying a maintenance tablet and a thermal coffee mug that had long since gone cold. He worked for the building management company and had spent the past 7 years handling everything from fire alarm inspections to water pressure complaints. The visit had been scheduled a week earlier. A routine inspection, 10 minutes at most. Nothing memorable, nothing important. Yet some of the most important moments in life begin disguised as ordinary errands. Eric checked the unit number against his work order and walked toward the penthouse door. The hallway was silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the waking city below. He knocked once. No answer. He waited several seconds before knocking again. Still nothing. Normally, he would have left a notice and moved on. Wealthy residents missed appointments all the time. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the unusual quiet. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was pure luck. As he turned away, he thought he heard a faint sound from inside. He paused. Listened. Nothing. Then it came again. Soft. Irregular. Almost impossible to identify. Eric walked back toward the door and pressed his ear closer. The sound disappeared. He glanced at the tablet in his hand. Part of him felt ridiculous. Another part felt uneasy. He knocked harder this time. Building maintenance, he called. Anyone home? No answer. The silence that followed felt wrong. Through the narrow glass panel beside the entryway, he could see part of the interior. A lamp remained on. The kitchen lights were still glowing. Something about that bothered him. People usually did not leave every light on before going to sleep. Eric pulled out his phone and contacted building security. Within minutes, a security supervisor arrived. Together they attempted to reach the residents through the intercom system. Nothing. Multiple calls were placed. No response. The supervisor frowned. Try the emergency contact. Eric watched as another call went unanswered. The uneasiness deepened. After a brief discussion, they contacted local authorities for a welfare check. 25 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. They asked questions, reviewed the circumstances, examined the situation through the glass. One officer noticed a phone lying on the kitchen floor. Another spotted what appeared to be a person partially visible beyond the cabinets. The atmosphere changed immediately. Procedures accelerated. Voices became sharper. Decisions happened quickly. For Madison, the sounds felt distant at first. She drifted in and out of awareness, unsure whether she was hearing reality or memory. Then she heard a voice. Clear. Real. Close. Another voice followed. Then movement. Doors opening. Footsteps crossing hardwood floors. Someone was finally there. Relief arrived before understanding. She could not see who had entered. She only knew that she was no longer alone. One of the officers spotted her immediately. "We have a female resident over here," he called. The room suddenly filled with activity. Emergency responders arrived moments later. Equipment bags appeared. Questions filled the air. The quiet that had dominated the penthouse all night vanished. As professionals worked around her, Madison caught brief fragments of conversation. Vital signs. Transport. Hospital. Everything felt distant and unreal. Yet one thought surfaced clearly through the confusion. Logan still had not come. Outside, the first rays of sunrise touched the Chicago skyline. Inside the penthouse, the longest night of Madison Bennett's life was finally ending. But the story itself was only beginning. Because somewhere across the city, the man who should have been standing beside her still believed that a single deleted message had erased the truth forever. When Madison Claire Bennett opened her eyes again, she did not recognize the ceiling above her. For a few confused seconds, she thought she was still dreaming. Everything felt distant. The bright lights, the faint beeping sounds, the voices somewhere beyond the room. Then reality slowly returned. A hospital. The realization arrived piece by piece. She turned her head slightly and noticed medical equipment beside the bed. A nurse standing near the doorway immediately saw her move. "Madison," the nurse said gently. "Can you hear me?" Madison blinked once. The nurse smiled with visible relief and stepped closer. "That is good. Very good." The words sounded simple, yet they carried enormous weight. Madison tried to speak. Her throat felt dry. Only one question mattered. "My baby," she whispered. Before the nurse could answer, another figure entered the room. Tall, calm, professional. Dr. Benjamin Hayes had spent more than 20 years helping patients through difficult moments. Yet something about this case had stayed with him from the beginning. He approached the bedside and offered a reassuring smile. "Your son is doing well," he said. "That is the first thing I wanted you to know." Tears immediately filled Madison's eyes. Relief washed over her so suddenly that she almost laughed. The baby was safe. Everything else could wait. For a few moments, the room remained quiet. Benjamin reviewed her chart, while Madison slowly adjusted to the reality around her. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital window. The world outside continued moving. Cars crossed intersections. People hurried to work. Yet inside this room, time felt suspended. "How long?" Madison finally asked. Benjamin understood the question immediately. "Several hours passed before help reached you," he replied carefully. He watched her reaction. Most patients focused on medical details. Madison's expression changed differently. She looked toward the nightstand, toward the personal belongings collected when she arrived, toward a phone sealed inside a transparent evidence bag. The memory returned all at once. The message, Logan, the waiting, the silence. Benjamin noticed the shift in her face. "Something is bothering you," he said. Madison swallowed slowly. "I sent a message." Benjamin pulled a chair closer. "To who?" "My husband." The doctor nodded. "Did he respond?" Madison looked away. That single movement told him everything. Later that afternoon, after Madison fell asleep again, Benjamin remained in his office reviewing reports. Something about the timeline refused to make sense. Emergency responders had arrived just in time. According to preliminary assessments, a delay of even a short period could have changed everything. Yet nobody close to Madison had contacted emergency services. Not her husband, not family, not friends. A maintenance worker had unknowingly become the reason help arrived. Benjamin leaned back in his chair and opened the intake summary again. Married, 8 months pregnant, husband unavailable throughout the night. The details felt incomplete. Then he remembered the phone. Most doctors would have moved on. Their responsibility ended with treatment. Benjamin had learned long ago that unusual situations often left clues in unexpected places. He requested the personal property inventory and reviewed the chain of custody record. The phone had remained untouched since arrival. Later that evening, Madison woke again. This time she asked for her device. A nurse carefully handed it to her. Madison opened her messages immediately. Her eyes scanned the conversation thread. Then she frowned. She checked again, refreshed the screen, scrolled upward. The message was gone, completely gone. The words she remembered typing no longer existed. Her pulse quickened. "That is impossible," she whispered. Benjamin happened to enter the room at that exact moment. He noticed her expression. "What happened?" Madison looked up slowly. "The message I sent Logan is missing." The room became very quiet. Benjamin took the phone and studied the screen. Most people would have seen nothing unusual. Yet something about the conversation history caught his attention immediately. There was an absence where information should have been. A gap. A silence. And for the first time, Benjamin began wondering whether someone had tried very hard to make sure a certain message would never be seen again. Logan Bennett arrived at the hospital just before noon carrying a bouquet of white lilies and the exact expression everyone expected to see. Concern, exhaustion, fear. Years of boardrooms, interviews, and investor meetings had taught him how to control perception. He knew how to enter a room and immediately become the person people wanted him to be. As he walked through the hospital corridor, nurses smiled sympathetically. Staff members moved aside. A worried husband rushing to see his recovering wife was a story everyone understood. Logan stepped into Madison's room and stopped beside the bed. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Madison studied his face carefully. She wanted to feel relieved. She wanted to believe everything was normal again. Instead, she felt something else. Distance. A strange emptiness she could not explain. Logan gently set the flowers on a nearby table. "Thank God you are okay," he said quietly. His voice sounded convincing. maybe even sincere. That was what made it so difficult. Madison nodded weakly. "Where were you?" she asked. The question arrived softly, but it immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Logan did not hesitate. "Business event," he replied. "My phone was buried under emails and calls all night. I had no idea anything happened until the building contacted me this morning." The answer sounded prepared. Clean. Efficient. Exactly the kind of response a successful executive would give during a crisis. Madison looked away toward the window. Part of her wanted to accept it. Another part remembered staring at her phone for hours while no response came. Before she could say anything else, Dr. Benjamin Hayes entered the room carrying a tablet. Logan immediately turned toward him. "Doctor, thank you for everything you've done," he said. Benjamin returned a polite nod. "Your wife is fortunate that help arrived when it did." Logan lowered his eyes. "I cannot stop thinking about that." Benjamin watched him carefully. Throughout his career, he had learned to pay attention not only to words, but also to timing. Some people reacted naturally. Others reacted strategically. Logan belonged to the second category. "The maintenance appointment may have saved valuable time," Benjamin continued. "Had circumstances been different, the outcome could have been very different as well." Logan's expression tightened for a fraction of a second before returning to concern. It was subtle. Most people would never have noticed it. Benjamin did. The conversation moved on. Nurses entered and exited the room. Hospital routines continued around them. Yet something remained unsettled. Later that afternoon, Logan sat beside Madison while she rested. He answered messages from executives, took phone calls in the hallway, updated friends and colleagues. Everywhere he went, the same narrative followed him. Devoted husband, family man, victim of unfortunate circumstances. By evening, flowers filled half the room. Sympathy arrived from every direction. Only one person seemed unaffected by the performance. Benjamin sat alone in his office reviewing records once again. Madison's missing message continued bothering him. Not because messages disappeared. People deleted things every day. What bothered him was the pattern surrounding its disappearance. The timing, the silence, the inconsistencies. He opened his notes and reviewed the timeline from the beginning. Madison sends a message. No response follows. Hours pass. Help arrives through pure coincidence. Logan claims ignorance. Individually, each detail could be explained. Together, they formed something far more troubling. Benjamin stared through the office window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere inside that city was the missing piece of the puzzle. He could feel it. The message had existed. Madison remembered writing it. The phone showed evidence of a gap, and gaps rarely appeared on their own. As darkness settled over the city once again, Logan believed the hardest part was over. Madison was alive. The crisis had passed. The missing message was gone. What he did not know was that the silence protecting him was already beginning to crack. 3 days later, Dr. Benjamin Hayes stopped telling himself it was probably nothing. The missing message had become impossible to ignore. Every time he reviewed the timeline, the same question returned. Why did everything depend on coincidence? Why had a maintenance appointment become the difference between disaster and survival? Why had a husband remained unreachable through the most critical hours of his wife's life? Individually, the details could be dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern. Late that afternoon, Benjamin sat inside a conference room with Rachel Morgan, a digital forensic consultant occasionally used by hospital legal teams when electronic records became relevant to patient investigations. Rachel had spent years recovering data people believed was gone forever. Phones, tablets, laptops. She often joked that technology remembered everything, even when humans wished it would forget. Madison's phone rested on the table between them. Benjamin explained the situation. Rachel listened quietly before connecting specialized recovery equipment to the device. "Most people think deleting something makes it disappear," she said. "Usually, it only makes it harder to find." Hours passed. Lines of data scrolled across multiple monitors. Timestamps, system logs, device activity, tiny fragments of information hidden beneath the surface of ordinary use. Benjamin watched patiently. He did not fully understand the technical details, but he understood persistence. Sometimes the truth simply required patience. Shortly after 7 o'clock, Rachel suddenly leaned closer to one of the screens. "Interesting." Benjamin immediately looked up. Rachel continued typing. Additional records appeared. Then more. A partial recovery log surfaced from deep within the phone's archived data. Rachel's expression changed. The curiosity disappeared. Professional focus took its place. "Doctor," she said quietly, "you should see this." Benjamin stood and moved beside her workstation. The screen displayed a message record. Damaged, but readable. Not complete, yet unmistakable. Rachel expanded the entry and began cross-referencing additional logs. Within minutes, a larger picture emerged. The room became silent. The recovered record showed a message sent at 2:43 a.m. Recipient, Logan Bennett. Status, delivered. Benjamin felt his stomach tighten. Rachel opened another system log. A second timestamp appeared beneath the first. Opened, 2:44 a.m. Neither of them spoke. Rachel continued searching. Then the final entry appeared. Deleted, 2:45 a.m. Benjamin stared at the screen. 3 timestamps. 3 facts. No speculation required. No interpretation necessary. The message had reached Logan. Logan had opened it. 1 minute later, the message had been removed. Rachel opened another report. Device synchronization records. Location metadata. Independent verification from separate systems. The evidence matched perfectly. "There is more," she said. A map appeared on the monitor. GPS records linked to the phone activity pinpointed a location in downtown Chicago. A luxury rooftop lounge. Not a business meeting. Not an office. Not a corporate event. Benjamin slowly sat down. For the first time, the entire story became visible. Madison sends a desperate message. Logan receives it almost immediately. Logan reads it. Logan deletes it. Hours pass. No emergency call is made. No assistance is requested. No attempt is documented. Rachel printed the recovery reports and placed them on the table. The papers looked ordinary. Yet Benjamin understood what he was holding. Proof. Not assumptions. Not suspicions. Facts. The kind of facts that survive lawyers, public relations campaigns, and carefully crafted explanations. Across the city, Logan Bennett spent the evening believing the worst had already passed. Madison was recovering. The message was gone. The questions were fading. What he could not possibly know was that the one thing he had tried hardest to erase had just returned. And this time, it came back carrying receipts. 6 weeks later, Logan Bennett stood beneath a massive crystal chandelier inside the Grand Lakeshore Ballroom and believed he had survived the storm. The room was filled with Chicago's most powerful executives, investors, politicians, and media personalities. Expensive suits moved through the crowd. Champagne glasses reflected golden light. Cameras flashed from every direction. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Logan was receiving the Midwest Business Leadership Award, one of the most prestigious honors in his industry. The event would be live-streamed to thousands of viewers across the country. To everyone watching from the outside, his life appeared fully restored. Madison had returned home from the hospital. Their son had been born healthy. Public sympathy had strengthened Logan's reputation. Business was thriving. The narrative could not have been better. At least, that was what Logan believed. At 8:03 p.m., he stepped onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. A giant LED screen stretched behind him from floor to ceiling. His company logo rotated across the display while photographers crowded near the front rows. Logan adjusted his tie and smiled confidently. The audience smiled back. Several tables away, Chloe Pierce sat quietly beside a group of social media personalities. She looked elegant and relaxed. Neither of them had any reason to expect what would happen next. Logan began his acceptance speech. He thanked his employees, his partners, his supporters. He spoke about leadership, perseverance, and family values. The audience responded warmly. Everything was unfolding exactly according to plan. Then the screen behind him flickered. Once, twice. Logan paused and glanced over his shoulder. A few technicians exchanged confused looks near the control booth. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. The company logo disappeared. A blank black screen replaced it. The audience waited. Then an image appeared. At first, nobody understood what they were seeing. It looked like an ordinary smartphone screenshot. A text message conversation. Nothing more. Logan's smile vanished instantly. The room grew quiet. The image expanded until it filled the entire screen. A message appeared at the center. Stroke. Baby. Help. Call 911. The audience read the words in silence. Below the message appeared a timestamp. Sent. 2:43 a.m. Another line followed. Delivered. Then another. Opened. 2:44 a.m. Logan stopped breathing for a moment. The ballroom felt suddenly smaller. Hotter. Louder. Yet nobody was speaking. Every eye remained fixed on the screen. Then the final line appeared. Deleted. 2:45 a.m. A wave of whispers moved across the audience. Phones immediately emerged from pockets. Journalists began typing. Camera operators redirected lenses toward the stage. Logan stood frozen beneath the spotlight. The next image displayed a digital forensic report. Then another. GPS coordinates appeared. A location tag. The rooftop lounge. Not a business meeting. Not an office. Not a conference. Facts appeared one after another. Clinical. Precise. Unemotional. The kind of evidence that required no explanation. Across the ballroom, board members exchanged alarmed glances. Investors leaned toward one another. Chloe slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time all evening, nobody looked impressed. Nobody looked inspired. Nobody looked convinced. Logan opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Years of carefully managing his public image suddenly felt useless. The screen continued displaying the same 3 timestamps. Sent. Opened. Deleted. 3 simple actions. 3 decisions that had changed everything. Somewhere at the back of the room, a reporter quietly whispered the question everyone was already asking. Not whether the evidence was real. Not whether the message existed. But why a man who had seen it chose to do nothing. And as the applause that once filled the ballroom disappeared into complete silence, Logan Bennett finally realized that the truth had arrived in the one place he could never control. 4 months later, spring finally arrived in Chicago. The snow had disappeared from the sidewalks. Trees along the lakefront carried fresh green leaves. The city looked lighter somehow, as though winter had taken more than cold weather with it. Madison Claire Bennett pushed a stroller along a quiet path overlooking Lake Michigan. The breeze moved gently across the water. Morning sunlight reflected against the waves in sheets of silver. Inside the stroller, her son slept peacefully beneath a soft blue blanket. For the first time in a long time, Madison was not thinking about hospitals, investigations, or unanswered questions. She was thinking about feeding schedules, bedtime routines, and whether her son would inherit her eyes or Logan's. The scandal that followed the award ceremony had spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, clips from the event flooded social media. News organizations replayed the footage repeatedly. Business networks discussed it for weeks. Journalists examined every detail of the timeline. The evidence remained unchanged each time it was reviewed. Sent. Opened. Deleted. 3 words had become impossible for the public to forget. Logan spent months trying to repair the damage. Statements were released. Interviews were arranged. Advisors worked around the clock. None of it mattered. People can forgive mistakes. They struggle to forgive choices. Board members quietly removed him from leadership. Major investors distanced themselves. Partnerships ended. Invitations stopped arriving. The life he had spent years constructing began unraveling one piece at a time. Chloe Pierce disappeared from public view shortly afterward. Sponsorship opportunities vanished. Media attention became impossible to escape. Eventually, silence replaced the glamorous online world she once inhabited. Madison never celebrated any of it. That surprised many people. Friends expected anger. Reporters expected revenge. Social media expected dramatic public statements. Instead, she declined interviews, ignored requests for comment, refused opportunities to profit from the story. Whenever someone asked why, her answer remained simple. I already got what matters. Then she would look toward her son. On a bright Thursday morning, Madison paused beside a bench overlooking the water. Her phone vibrated softly inside her purse. Months earlier, that sound would have triggered anxiety, questions, memories, pain. Now it felt ordinary. She checked the screen and smiled. A message from Dr. Benjamin Hayes. How is my favorite little fighter doing today? Madison laughed quietly and snapped a photo of the sleeping baby. Growing too fast already, she replied. A few seconds later, another message appeared. That sounds exactly right. Enjoy every minute. She slipped the phone back into her purse and continued walking. Ahead of her, families pushed strollers. Joggers followed the shoreline trail. Dogs chased tennis balls across the grass. Ordinary life unfolded in every direction. It felt beautiful, Not because it was perfect, because it was real. Madison stopped for a moment and looked out across the lake. Somewhere behind the skyline stood the rooftop where a decision had been made. Somewhere behind those towers stood the ballroom where the truth finally emerged. Yet neither place held power over her anymore. The past had become exactly that. The past. Her son stirred softly and wrapped his tiny hand around one of her fingers. Madison smiled. Some people spend their lives waiting for someone else to save them. She had learned something different. Survival begins the moment you stop waiting. The wind carried the scent of spring across the water as she adjusted the stroller and continued down the path. Behind her remained headlines, scandals, and broken promises. Ahead of her remained possibility. And as the Chicago skyline shimmered beneath the morning sun, Madison realized that the message he deleted lasted less than a minute. The life she built afterward would last forever.